A self-described angry black man.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent introduction, but let me just correct, it's actually the angriest black man in America. Angry is cool, but angriest is better. I'm only going to take a few minutes to say a few things, and one of the things I always like to do with groups like this, because most organizations, they invite lawyers to come up, and the lawyer is supposed to be holier than thou, know everything, so we dictate to the audience what they should do. But I'm not here to be a lawyer. In fact, I always tell people I am not a lawyer who happens to be a black man. Instead, I'm a black man who just happens to be a lawyer. And there's a big difference, because when you go to law school, you don't get trained, you get brainwashed. You actually get trained into buying into the system. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, then lawyers have to argue that laws promoting slavery are good because slavery was the law. Lawyers have to argue that apartheid was good because it was the law. Lawyers have to argue that women not being able to vote at one time was good because that was the law. So you never end the debate with what the law is. You end the debate with what the law should be. Let me say what I mean by that in regard to the Move family. The parole law says that in order for you to be eligible for parole, you have to go in front of the parole board and say, I did it, I'm sorry. And once you say, I did it, I'm sorry, now they open the door for consideration. They might not give you parole, but until you say, I'm sorry, I did it, now they're going to entertain it. It's actually section 62 of the Crimes Code and all that, but we don't need to get into that. What we need to do is this. We need to petition and pressure and instigate and engage in some serious civil disobedience if it comes to that in order to change the parole law. Nothing's going to change until you change the parole law. The parole law should say that you do not, I repeat, do not have to admit to your wrongdoing, because think about it. And what you can do is, I always say, you got to use the law to change the law. You use their language to make them do the right thing. For example, you say, okay, I hear what you say about you have to admit your wrongdoing and you have to say, I'm sorry. But what about the fact that since 1989, 330 people have been exonerated and freed from prison? 330 people. Not one of them admitted to their wrongdoing. But you got at least 330. We know there's thousands more. But let's just take their 330. You say to the parole board, not one of these 330 people since 1989 across 37 states, not one of these 330 admitted to their wrongdoing. But the system had to concede that, wow, we got the wrong person. What if there wasn't DNA? Those 330 people would have died in prison because they wouldn't have said, I did it, because they didn't do it. And then signs showed they didn't. So what we have to do is to change the law to, and by the way, of those 330, there were 31 who actually pled guilty in order to go to prison. Now, why would somebody plead guilty to go to prison? Because they got the shit scared out of them during trial. The DA told them that if you don't take this 5-year sentence, you're going to be convicted and get 50 years. Well, I would take the 5 years too. So you got people who pled guilty knowing that they didn't do it. And once they got into prison, they were trying to get out and they were thinking, hey, because by the way, in prison, believe it or not, are some of the best lawyers. Some of the best lawyers I've actually met were people who were in prison. I'm a lawyer today because of some jailhouse lawyers back in the 80s who actually gave me the idea of going to law school instead of becoming a teacher. But let me tell you what you all need to do, because I'm not here to give you legal advice as a lawyer. I'm here to instigate. I'm here to agitate. I'm here to light a fire for you to say, wow, what that guy said made sense. Let me go out and do it. So what you need to do is this. And I know politics is kind of corny and kind of weak and it seems ineffective, but in this system, you got to play the game that's being played. You might not like the game, but if that's the only game, in basketball, you might not like to dribble, but it says you got to dribble. So if you don't like to dribble, you got to dribble to play basketball. You might not like politics, but that's the system. That's the game. Either we destroy this system or we use it to our advantage. Those are the only options. Either destroy it or exploit it. I'll tell you privately about the destruction part, but right now let's talk about the exploiting part. The exploiting part, what we need to do is to black elected officials in the state legislature. These people, these state reps from Philadelphia, they win because poor black people vote for them. These North Philly, South Philly, West Philly state reps and state senators, they win from Philadelphia to go to the Pennsylvania state legislature because black people support them. And really not a whole lot of black people, because people are indifferent. I'm asking you all to try to put, I'm not going to say pressure people, but enlighten people to pressure these elected officials. Get at least one from the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus to introduce a bill saying that no longer will a person have to admit to his or her wrongdoing to be eligible. And then people say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Then you throw back at them those 330 who were exonerated. Of those 330, 31 of them pled guilty and 20 were on death row. 20 of those 330 were on death row. If it had not been for DNA, they would have been executed. So what we need to do is to change Title 26 of the Pennsylvania, Title 61 of the Pennsylvania statutes to make it so that you can keep all that other parole stuff in terms of getting an education inside the prison, becoming a Muslim or a Christian in the prison, doing all these positive things in prison, not getting any write-ups in prison. We can say, okay, you can keep that part. But the part that says you must admit to your wrongdoing, it actually promotes perjury. Because now you got to lie and say you did it, knowing all along you didn't do it. So again, use the system to attack the system. Say to the system, perjury is bad, isn't it? Yes. So if you're telling me to lie about a crime I didn't commit, you're promoting perjury. They can't argue against that. Make the perjury argument, make the 330 that have been exonerated from DNA since 1989 across 37 states, make those arguments and use the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus right here in Philadelphia. I wish we had people like Roxanne Jones still around. And I can't even think, apart from Brother Dave and Roxanne, I know politics. And the fact that I got to think long and hard to come up with more than two.
Next.